Drew McIntyre is one of the most interesting and nuanced characters on WWE TV right now, and his current gimmick brilliantly blurs the lines between fiction and reality and draws from some real-life experiences and a series of unplanned and unfortunate circumstances that you will have to see to even believe. So today, I'll be explaining the full history behind one of WWE's more sympathetic villains, an unfortunate story of a fallen chosen one, and how his broken dreams made him break his own moral code and abandon everything he believes in. This is the story of how Drew McIntyre became the biggest hypocrite. The real portion of the story begins after WrestleMania 36 in 2020, or at Clash at the Castle in 2022, or arguably even later at WrestleMania 39 in 2023. But Drew's early career is also somewhat relevant, so I'll cover it briefly. McIntyre was signed to the WWE in 2007 to a developmental contract and did debut on TV during that time, but following an extensive reboot of his character, his quote-unquote real introduction would come in 2009. What's special about this case is that, unlike pretty much anyone else in the WWE, Vince McMahon himself brought out McIntyre and publicly endorsed him as a future world champion, aka a chosen one, on live television. This was unheard of, and 9 times out of 10 in pro wrestling, calling someone the next XYZ or attaching a huge label to them before they've even proven themselves is never a good idea, and young McIntyre was no exception to this rule. Because in the years that followed, his career just would not pan out. McIntyre would gradually fall down the card, as his main event stocks died a very slow death, and he was eventually released in June of 2014. But Drew did not let this derail him. He went back to the independent scene and went on a very solid workhorse kind of run. The companies that Drew worked with during his time away from the WWE ranged from Evolve to Insane Championship Wrestling, and of course TNA or Impact, where he would become a world champion for the first time. Superkick Studios has a wonderful video going into full detail on these events, so feel free to check out his documentary for more information on Drew's return to the WWE. Speaking of, 2017 is the year that WWE would come calling again. McIntyre started off in NXT this time around, having put on a lot more muscle mass and also with a strong catalog of matches under his belt. This time, McIntyre was a much more polished performer than his previous self, and his re-debut on the main roster would come in 2018, where bizarrely enough, he would once again be subjected to a lot of stop-and-start booking, oftentimes being shoehorned into B-grade villain groups that exist solely to oppose Roman Reigns. Thankfully, his time would finally come in 2020 when he won the Royal Rumble, going on to face Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 36 in a winning effort, capturing the WWE title for the first time in his career. The ups and downs and the struggles up to this point are already great enough that this might very well be the complete story. And after all that work, you would think McIntyre is set for life. And while it's partially true, McIntyre's time at the top was complicated. Because how could anyone forget about 2020? And out of every year to have one's crowning moment, this is when McIntyre had his. To be fair, the reign itself was pretty good, but beating Brock Lesnar in an empty hall, being the face of the WWE in an era that nobody wants to remember, it's a pretty hard pill to swallow. McIntyre lost to Randy Orton in a Hell in a Cell match before recapturing the title quickly after. But he would lose it for good when The Miz cashed in his Money in the Bank contract at Elimination Chamber 2021. He faced the freshly crowned Bobby Lashley at WrestleMania 37 for the championship, but surprisingly fell short. And from here on out, McIntyre would be in limbo for quite a while, facing largely unimpressive and heatless opponents even at stadium shows like WrestleMania or SummerSlam. His booking once again became questionable after it seemed like he had become a made man for life. Things did start looking up when WWE announced Clash at the Castle at Cardiff, Wales, and all signs pointed towards McIntyre challenging for Roman Reigns' championship. Given the occasion and how relevant Drew's background was to the whole event, it felt like he was gonna do it. This was one of the rare occasions where it felt like Roman could genuinely lose. But alas, Drew could not do it. It was very close, but it just would not be. thanks to a debuting new member of the Bloodline, Solo Sikoa. This loss was particularly heartbreaking because it was in front of his own people, and as Drew would describe it, Clash at the Castle was like capturing lightning in a bottle for the second time after Mania 36 didn't turn out how he expected it. In terms of storyline as well as real life, this is the one event that would define Drew's career trajectory and mental state for the next 2 years. The one wound that just refused to heal. He once again entered smaller programs following the loss. Him and some other babyfaces had a War Games match against the Bloodline at Survivor Series of that year. But his next real program would begin at around WrestleMania 39. He was featured in a story with Gunther and Sheamus competing for the Intercontinental Championship. Now, this is where things got a bit interesting. While neither Drew nor Sheamus were heels in this program, this was the first instance in quite some time where Drew wasn't portrayed as a pure white meat hero. Both men would lose to Gunther in a tremendous effort, and after this, Drew would disappear for some time. At around this time is also when reports came out that Drew was not happy with his WWE contract, and he might not renew his deal with the company. Despite this, he would make his return at Money in the Bank 2023, once again confronting Gunther, this time in singles fashion. The match would take place at SummerSlam 2023, and this was the last of Drew McIntyre as we knew him. McIntyre could not dethrone Gunther, and walked out of the arena looking visibly upset, almost no-selling the match. This further fueled the contract rumors as well as speculation that McIntyre may be turning heel. Afterwards, McIntyre was put in a makeshift tag team with Matt Riddle, which once again struck the fans as questionable booking if anything. But soon, we would start seeing hints about McIntyre's impending evolution, such as when he interfered in a match between the Viking Raiders and the New Day, and he was justifiably trying to get back at the former tag team because they hit him first, but hurled a damn chair at Xavier Woods by quote-unquote accident. One thing was for sure, he was becoming more aggressive than he was just a few months back. All it was missing was for one final something to truly trigger McIntyre, which would come in the form of this man, Jey Uso, who had then just recently moved to Monday Night Raw. And oh man, this is when shit hit the fan. In the eyes of many, even including the Bloodline's enemies like Sami Zayn or Cody Rhodes, Jey Uso was a changed man. These events took place at around late August and early September, so this is about when Jey was betrayed by his brother Jimmy, and he wanted to break away from the Bloodline for good and pursue a new start on Monday Night Raw. A decision which was wholly supported by Cody and Sami, but not this man. In his eyes, Jey Uso is every bit as responsible as the rest of the Bloodline is for what happened at Clash at the Castle. There is no redemption for Jey, nothing. While this story was brewing, McIntyre also had some matches with the New Day to finish off their little mini feud, and he was slowly getting closer to just snapping completely. Jey and McIntyre finally confronted each other and made their issues known, and a match was scheduled. Back then, the Judgment Day were at their strongest, and there isn't a single second on Raw that they weren't meddling in everyone's business, including Jey Uso's, even trying to recruit him and being present at ringside for his match with McIntyre. However, Jey turned down their assist and super kicked them instead. That's when McIntyre would capitalize on a distracted Jey Uso and hit his finisher to win the match. This moment is quite important. Think of it as the first stage of Drew McIntyre's hatred blinding him and making him compromise his own morals. Afterwards, McIntyre had a match with Kofi and went back to his feud with the New Day briefly. Upon defeating Kofi, McIntyre would watch idly as the Viking Raiders beat up Kofi, doing nothing to help. No interfering, no stopping them, nothing. Signaling just how much closer he was getting to the edge. The next big turning point in Drew's arc would come in October, when he challenged Seth Rollins, the then World Heavyweight Champion. The same night on Raw that the challenge was issued, Damian Priest of the Judgment Day would try to cash in his Money in the Bank contract on Seth Rollins before McIntyre promptly stopped them. Keep this dynamic between McIntyre and Damian Priest in mind for later because it becomes quite relevant. The promo exchanges between Drew and Seth would flesh out McIntyre's character further. From his perspective, not only did he get screwed by the Bloodline, his previous crowning moment was also not what it was promised to be, so he is justified in being bitter. Seth, on the other hand, tells Drew that he's been blaming everyone but himself, and that everyone has been screwed over by the Bloodline, not just Drew McIntyre, and that he should just move on, which is also pretty much valid. Rollins would cap off the segment with a bold statement, saying that their preceding match will be the best thing to happen to McIntyre because for the first time in a long time, Drew will have nobody to blame, nobody to point the finger at, but himself. Around this time, McIntyre had also started mingling with the Judgment Day, despite their generally toxic relationship, making his intentions and morals seem even more questionable. Drew would go on to lose against Seth Rollins, and this was yet another heartbreak that just compounded what he was already going through. Judgment Day at the time was feuding with pretty much every babyface on Raw, and the tensions came to a head at Survivor Series in a War Games match. The faces and the heels both had a mystery entrant, and it was revealed to be Randy Orton and Drew McIntyre respectively. This character arc has 3 full circle moments from my count, and this was one of them. He doesn't particularly like the Judgment Day, but he's been so far removed from right and wrong and what he used to be, and just so purely driven by his hatred that he's aligned himself with a group that isn't much better than the Bloodline, just because he doesn't like Jay and Seth. The babyfaces prevailed in the match, and at the end of the event, something very significant happened that also affected Drew McIntyre's character greatly. CM Punk, of all people, returned to the WWE. Before Drew got involved with CM Punk, he had many repeat matches with Seth, Zayn, and also Jey Uso. Most of the time it being the same theme of other babyfaces not approving of McIntyre's antics. It didn't really break any new ground, so I'm not going to cover it extensively. McIntyre had some subtle jabs for CM Punk in interviews and also on WWE TV immediately after Punk had returned, hinting at some bad history between the two. But things wouldn't really pop off until they met face to face at January 8, 2024. McIntyre aired out some very heavy stuff during this face-off, particularly mentioning that many years ago, when McIntyre was a rookie in the WWE and CM Punk was champion, Punk never really stood up for younger talent such as Drew, who were going through a tough time, essentially calling him a two-faced fraud who portrayed himself as some leader in front of people but did the opposite behind closed doors. A little context is that back in January, CM Punk vs Seth Rollins was the premier story that WWE was building for WrestleMania 40. So this segment between Drew and Punk was no more than like a sub-story for the Royal Rumble, which both men were entering. But then came the actual Royal Rumble. The two had several moments in the match to further their story, and things would take a very interesting turn when McIntyre used the Future Shock move on Punk and inadvertently injured him for real. As messed up as it sounds, this injury did so much for Drew, because now Punk was out of the picture for Mania 40, instantly slotting Drew in as a replacement for Rollins' opponent. Otherwise, Drew most likely would have had a match with Sami in a losing effort. On the Raw after the Rumble 2, McIntyre would have another segment with Punk that took the feud to a whole new level. I prayed for this, and it happened. That's what McIntyre had to say to Punk in regards to his injury. Also adding that he slept like a baby after learning that Punk was injured. These series of coincidences and quick storyline pivots made Drew and Punk feel bigger than Punk vs Seth. Speaking of Seth, McIntyre would qualify for the World Heavyweight Championship, as expected, by winning the Elimination Chamber. He cheated multiple times in this match as well. At this point, the guy has completely lost himself. I mentioned that this character arc has multiple full circle moments, 3 to be exact, and the second one would come soon after. McIntyre had a match with Cody Rhodes on a random episode of Raw. This felt like a completely harmless filler match, sure to end in a DQ, because WWE is known to do this when both men are title contenders. But what happened was very significant. It's like a convergence of stories, if you will. McIntyre actually beat Cody, becoming the third man ever to do so thanks to Solo Sikoa, who interfered and spiked Cody. This was brilliant. It furthered Cody's story, this being the second time Solo has cost him, and also brought McIntyre's story full circle. This exact same action from the Bloodline is the reason he's even on this path, but now he actively chose to benefit from someone else suffering the same fate. It's in this moment that Drew became the very thing he set out to destroy. This McIntyre arc was a slow burn. but it really rewards you for following the story. And now we have one last full circle / hypocrisy moment that needs to be addressed. Seth Rollins was handling two stories in the build to WrestleMania 40, one with Drew and the other with the Bloodline. And Drew would tell Seth that he should focus on the match, otherwise he might lose everything, which he was right. Come WrestleMania Night 2, Rollins was too broken from his battles the night previous, and the championship was ripe for Drew's taking. But maybe Drew should have taken his own advice, because during the build as well as the match itself, Drew would constantly troll CM Punk, even after winning the belt, which allowed Punk to capitalize on it, attacking Drew and creating a window for Damian Priest to cash in his Money in the Bank contract, once again screwing Drew over and robbing him of his championship. But Drew has nobody to blame but himself. I call this another full circle moment because it was Drew that always prevented Damian from cashing in. That's why I said keep their dynamic in mind. His actions all came back to haunt him in the end. Drew's current character is compelling in the sense that it's quite experimental by WWE standards. It isn't black and white. You can't exactly love or hate him. We're used to heels being like, oh, I'm the best, or go straight to just disrespecting the crowd, or using shock value insults like, I hope you die, or I hope your arm gets cut off, which I just find so corny. With Drew, it's a slow burn, and when he does use shocking insults, he only says that to someone who he's actually in a blood feud with. This is the story of a man who was driven to the extreme by unfortunate circumstances, and you feel for him, but at the same time, he's just gone too far. That nuance, the gray area, makes it so compelling. Recently, Drew has officially resigned with the WWE, putting the contract dispute rumors to rest. And by all means, he seems penciled in for a win against Damian Priest at the upcoming second Clash at the Castle. And of course, when CM Punk is cleared, a bloody program with him too, perhaps even a Hell in a Cell match. How this character progresses going forward will be a very interesting process, and I cannot wait to see it unfold. So far, it's been Edward Takeshi, and this was the story of how Drew McIntyre became the biggest hypocrite. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. I do reviews and documentaries on pro wrestling, anime, and manga on this channel. Peace.